let me make it very clear that I won't have answers to all your questions. I obviously won't have answers. What I'm going to be doing today is to share my perspective on certain questions or certain issues which you may want me to comment on. And the other is, so you may have a perspective which is different from mine, and it's absolutely okay to disagree. The other thing is we are often looking for universal solutions, but there are no universal solutions. Solutions always emerge from a context, so they have to be context specific. In fact, in TISS, when we teach, we get a lot of students who are really passionate and excited about education, and they want to change the world. They want to do lots of things. And when we teachers go to the class and start talking about educational issues, all we do is we examine the problem, then we constantly talk about the problem and critically looking at it and finding its causes and things. And we often told, why the hell don't you talk about solutions? So we still continue to believe that it's important to examine the problem and understand how it kind of unfolds. And then you figure out for yourself what the solutions are going to be or what you'd like to do with it. The third is that we often have a tendency to examine social reality in binaries, in bipolar opposites. So it's even though it's a useful lens or useful critical category to have to look at the social reality in terms of bipolar opposites, they're more like ideal types. So there's a conventional school, there's a progressive school. So it's conventional versus progressive. There's a child-centered curriculum, there's a knowledge-centered curriculum, or there's a board exam versus continuous and comprehensive evaluation. So this tendency is, even though it's very tempting to fall into this tendency to look at reality as either or and to immediately condemn one and to propose solutions, this is also problematic because I believe it also hides more than it kind of reveals. So in this context, also we can place the public-private binary, the public school versus the private school, which some of you have asked in your questions, and that is according to me, that's a problem because there are no. When you talk of schools, if you look at the Indian social fabric, the educational system is pretty much in sync with the fragmented social fabric. So depending on where you are located, that will determine which school you go to. So if you look at the government school system and if you look at the private school system, they're internally heterogeneous. They're not homogeneous spaces. But often, most of us, when we talk of government schools or private schools, we talk in one breath as if it means the same thing. It doesn't. So you have government schools, you have Kendriya Vidyalayas, which have huge, good infrastructure, financially very strongly supported teachers, this, that, and the other. And you have municipal schools which are basically struggling. And you have schools like Sainik School or Navodaya Vidyalaya or several other schools. So within the government school system, also there are several hierarchies. And within the private schools also you must be aware that there are schools which have skin sensor taps and air-conditioned classrooms, air-conditioned buses and this, that and the other. And then there are schools which are functioning from a garage or a basement or it could be any such space. So first of all, I'd like to, not just me alone, lots of people have been saying that government schools and private schools cannot be compared as if they are, there's only one difference between them. There are internally heterogeneous spaces and, and basically the poor disadvantaged person accesses either of them depending on where he or she is located. So it's not that a private school is better. So that myth has to be broken. Uh, The other is are you would you be familiar with the public-private kind of controversy in the context of Indian education system, the the debate around it, and would you want me to talk about it, Krishna?
Sure, ma'am. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think people here would know, would be aware of it, but probably not all arguments.
Okay, so let's begin with ASAR, for instance. That's, I think, very, very important. ASAR, for the past several years, since 2005, has been saying that children in schools are not learning, and a class 5 child doesn't know a class 2 sum or reading or writing and stuff like that. And they, even though they don't really categorically say, but it's assumed, it says that the children are not learning across schools, but children in government schools are particularly not learning as compared to private schools, and they're better. And the other thing they've been saying, so the parents are making this choice and they're shifting from government school and now going to private schools. So we need to support private schools. Now, what you must remember first is that this public has always been supported by the private in the Indian context. You have philanthropic organizations, you have philanthropers, you have several civil society organizations which have been working in the field of education. So, but now there's a difference in terms of there was a sort of a partnership where you try and support the government system. You don't try and replace the government system. You don't try and say that we are better than you. But if you read research which is coming from today's context, you'll realize that the assertion which is coming is, look, the government schools have taken far too long, and yet they've not been able to make children learn, which is a basic requirement of school, and they should just pack their bags and they should hand over the support of the primary education to the private schools. Now, what is different is one is a lot of these corporates have entered into the space, so there are lots of people which are also fly-by-night operators. They work in the areas of school education, and that even the nomenclature that they use keeps changing. So, affordable private school, or budget private school, or low-cost private school, depending on the. The other is that. People like Krishna Kumar have said that if you look at the PPP, public-private partnership, it's not really a partnership. Partnership is is when you try and work towards the common goal. So if you see the kind of relationship or the kind of accusations or counter accusations which are made these days, it's like a jostling for space. Like, look, you move, I'll do my job. Even though some of these NGOs are doing fantastic work and they train their teachers and they get teachers from the community and they try and show how the children are learning. But what they're doing is they're setting up their own space in a government school. So their own teachers go to that school, trained by them. They have different norms for hiring them, different payment requirements. So they're not really supporting the government system. So this is one important framework within which you can understand the work of some of the private organizations, where you try and say we are better, and so you please move and you pack your bags and give the space to us. So what are they saying? First they're saying that children in going to our schools are learning and they're learning better, right? And second, they're saying that our schools are very cost efficient. So they're saying that, for instance, there's work by Jain and Holakia, who are one is an IIM professor and the other is works with he has Gyanshala in Gujarat. What they're saying is that if you try and do the mathematics, you'll realize that if you want to universalize elementary education, if you try and imagine the sixth way commission salaries, that's not going to happen. Either you have a huge pupil teacher ratio, which is also not advisable, or you give those less salaries to teachers. So they're saying if you want to achieve or universalize elementary education, you'd have to pay teachers less because that's consuming a lot of the money. So their argument is that you take people from the community and you train them, you give them training which is not as elaborate, and you pay them less. You pay them significantly less. And the other thing they're saying is the accountability of these teachers is very high. So children don't perform when the teachers are thrown out. So this is, yeah, so I just first tell what they're saying. And they say our teachers are better because they're not smug, they're not lackadaisical, they're not the government school teachers. Government school teachers get a lot of salary, and yet they don't perform, children don't learn, there's proxy attendance and all kinds of accusations are there. Children don't learn. And the other argument is they use this to say that parents, even poor parents now uh, want they're sending their children to government schools because they believe it's better, right? So these are the assertions made. So the solution which they gave are that you have all teachers on contract, you pay them less, right? You train them, give a very micro-managed kind of a training, and make them accountable and fix accountability. And in fact, they're even proposing a change in the amendment in the right to education, saying that learning outcomes should centrally figure there, and that's when the children are going to learn. Now, so hence the government should withdraw. So what are the counter arguments? What is the research showing? First, it's saying that a lot of this learning which happens with these still in the assessment is a very basic, rudimentary kind of a learning test, right? Which is not bad. Which is a meaning you can't say that the fact that children should learn at least something. It's they've got a point there. Yes, if they go to school, they should be learning to read and write at least. That's the minimum they can do. But the fear of this kind of emphasis on a minimalistic learning leads to something called teaching to the test. So what you do is what my students are going to be asked of in terms of showing their learning, that's what I'm going to teach them. To ensure that at least that much they know, right? And two is, of course, a very you forget the constructivist kind of an approach which people talk about. You forget that, and you help children learn the basics. The other is that it's a fact that in the lowest rung government schools, the children who are from very underprivileged or disadvantaged families, poor families, they are the ones who really go there. The fact that parents send their children to a private school doesn't make it automatically better. They assume, they think it's better, but it may not necessarily be. And I'm not saying they're not better. I'm saying that these are fears, or these are assumptions or allegations or whatever. The other is the fact that teachers need to be paid well. I don't know why the world is gunning for them, especially the government school teachers, and are really deep trouble because you assume the assumption, oh my God, they get fat salaries, they put up their feet on the table and they don't work at all, they couldn't care less, which is again problematic. There are good teachers and not so good teachers across school sectors. To say the government school teachers because they're getting a good salary, it's obviously it's a huge generalization, and generalizations may not necessarily be true. The other is so teachers also need to be treated with dignity, and if you believe that teachers by kind of making them scared about their job, that the children don't perform well, then they'll be chucked out, is a problematic assumption. I mean, I remember in one of my studies, I was in, I think, Rajasthan, and the chief minister had just around that time, she visited a school and she asked the student a question, and the student couldn't answer, and she immediately said, "Teacher ko suspend karo." So it sounds very good that, oh my God, oh wow, instant action, but it's not. It's not that simple. Children going to government schools struggle much more. The parents are away at work. They're trying to make two ends meet. So you can't. You have to take cognizance of the context. Like children, my children, for instance, they go to private schools, and the moment they come back, I have to be like really hyper. What homework have you got? What have you provide them all kinds of support, the economic capital, your institutions for them, social capital, cultural capital, all of that. And here the teachers, in that sense, they have it easier because the parents are also equally particular. In government schools, because of the circumstances, they may not be able to take care of their children's attention. I mean, again, I was in Madhya Pradesh, and I was talking to a government school teacher, and she was saying, "Ma'am, when children who come to our school are really poor, and the children of seasonal migrant labor, so the mawa is cultivated, like Tory cultivation. And when children cry at home and trouble their parents because they're hungry, they just make them bring mawa and they go off to sleep because it just makes you sleepy, so you forget your hunger. And in that state, you're going to a school. So how fair is it to say that the teacher, it's because the teacher is not performing? So to make these unilateral linkages without understanding the context and is problematic. And the other thing is, you may be aware that there's a requirement in the right to education which says that all schools must have these basic requirements in place in infrastructure. They talk of toilets and they talk of classrooms and teachers and this, that, and the other. And again, the low-cost private school lobby has been fighting against that, and they're saying that look, we don't comply by adhere to any of these requirements, but yet we perform. So we could be working from a basement for all you care, or a garage, or wherever, but our children perform. And there's also this thing that do they have toilets at home? Do they need toilets in school? This is you need to treat each child who comes to your school with dignity. Now, I'm not saying that the government schools are doing a fantastic job. They of course need to pull up their socks. They need to get but to make these assumptions and make these generalizations is problematic because the research also shows that in some of the researches of other people which I've also kind of commented on, like if you have a child, if you're comparing public school with the private school, again the comparisons are made like really randomly. The contexts of children are not similar, so it's not fair to compare. And if they find there's this World Bank study which I commented on, and if they find that the government school children are doing well, they had labeled it as exceptions. Those were exceptions. If you find that, and there also been reverse admissions or reverse movement. There are children who go to government school, private school, and back to government school. So that's the other is there's some interesting research by Professor Nalini Juneja in Bombay, and she had said that there's a blocked chimney theory. So what she says, when your children go to school, and they are assured admission to the secondary or the higher secondary, and you want your child to be in the same school. Now, sometimes schools, the government school, some schools are till primary level, right? So you the fear, the thought that your child, you'll have to ultimately pull out the school lane, and you'll have to seek admission in another secondary school. That makes, because the chimney is blocked, so the exit starts happening much earlier. Hello? Yeah. So there is this thing about private and public which people don't understand too well, and they make statements which are not like really true, or the sensitivity to understand the context of the child which who goes to a government school is missing. That leads to a lot of problems. Yeah. So I'm. Can do I respond to the questions which are coming? Even government school system has hierarchy which is opposed to the. Do I respond?
We can take the questions at the end, so that you can finish the train of thought.
But just to respond to the question, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's where I begin from. That both the government school systems and private school systems are internally differentiated. They are not homogeneous spaces. So not to say that the government school all is well, but the implications of having a free education system are very different for poor children, and that we need to be sort of careful about. Um, the other thing, in terms of what has this pandemic done, I don't really know what this. Now, again, this tendency to look at social reality in terms of before and after life, as if things are going to fundamentally change, there's going to be a revolution, and now the online is the way to go. I don't think we have either we have answers, nor we should be looking at a total discontinuity between the past and the present and things to change. In fact, it's done strange things in terms of education. If you look at, I think one is a structural impediment. That how do you get children to school? How do you make them sit together when there's a threat of, like, like physical contact spreading the disease? So one is the structural impediment, where people are proposing online solutions, and this, that, and the other that may help. The other is, I think we need to really reflect on the meaning of education and what we're doing in school systems. Schools, like, what does curriculum really mean? What is the value framework which we have, which should be constitutional ideally, which we want our children to adhere to? What kind of citizens do we want? Do we give emphasis to? So this is something which has been reflected on by a lot of people much before the pandemic came. The pandemic may have sharpened the. I hope it has. Like, you have, it's quite crazy. On one hand, it's a pandemic which cuts across. It's an equalizer. It cuts across caste and class and gender, and may invade anyone's body. So in that sense, one should have been united in fighting a common enemy. But now you have people who are either it's China, or it's Muslims in India, or it's a rich people. So it's a bit strange that you also at this moment you try and communalize. So what are we doing in schools, and what kind of education are we really? You're trying to attack people who are health workers, and there's also social. So it's led to a lot of strange dynamics, and you also created sharper boundaries around yourself, because everyone is your any potential enemy. So you keep. So I'm not contesting the fact that one shouldn't do that. Probably right now that's the way one needs to go ahead. That way it needs to confine oneself in one space. But it should really make us reflect on what's happening in school. And again, these are questions which are old questions. Like the Yashpal Committee report back in the early 90s talked about the meaning of learning, and how we need to make connections, how we need to recognize and appreciate the child's social context or the cultural context, and how do we really deal with these questions, and what kind of values are we talking about? Are we talking of punctuality and this, that, and the other, or are we talking of bigger, like equality, dignity of people, justice? So what is it that we're talking about? I think those are bigger questions rather than just a procedural. They also need to be thought about as to what you're going to do with children who now cannot come to school and stuff like that. But I'm saying that entire meaning of education also one needs to reflect on now. So you're kind of piling onto Muslims, and you're saying it's because of them, and they're going all over the place and spreading the disease. It's bizarre.
Krish, you have any questions you're going to ask?
So we did get a lot of questions from our participants as well. Some of them are very specific to classroom strategies, which we are not going to go through. Some of them we can take questions. You can, if participants have questions, they can type in the chat box and we can have them. And with regard to my questions, I just.
And yeah, Krishna, responding to your concern, the public becomes much more important in this kind of a context, where the poor people are going to be affected much more by this disease than the people who've got deep pockets. So the role of the public becomes even more important. Yeah. So should I respond to the question?
Sure, ma'am. Sure.
Are
Yes,
teachers
ma'am.
currently equipped to support? No, they're not. They're not. The teachers need to be prepared. It will take time, reflection, and yeah. And if the remote learning or online learning is just a translation of a textbook, then again it doesn't serve much purpose. So there are huge challenges, of course, in terms of being able to meet. See, again, the problem is it's not like an either or situation. As if the earlier conventional classroom that we have right now, all is good with them, and now online is either good or bad. So the tendency to look at this kind of approach is problematic. That either this is good or that is good. What would be the best way to collaborate with government? If you look at Eklavya's work, they had done significantly good work in Madhya Pradesh, the HSTP, if you're aware of, the Hoshangabad Science Teaching Program, the Eklavya Social Science Program, where they went to government schools, they wrote textbooks, they trained, supported teachers, they had a different system of evaluation, so they were working with the government. They were not, yeah. So we have NGOs, for instance, here in Bombay, where some of these NGOs are doing fantastic work. But the fact of the matter is that this NGO which has taken over a few schools, and they're doing very good. The students are getting good results, and they're very smart, and they speak English, and they're very confident, this, that, and the other. But when we were speaking to the government school teachers, they said, no, we're in a pathetic situation. Because now the schools don't want to employ teachers because they're the fillers available, right? The teachers at a low salary are available, so the government doesn't feel the need to employ teachers. Two is our own colleagues tease us. Acha, you don't teach, you're just sitting and filling up forms. And third is if we want to teach, we have to teach in their pedagogy or their this thing. So it's a sense of it's not that they're feeling good about it. So these are, if you go to a space and you do your own stuff, and this is not collaboration. This is just to say that look, I know my job better than you, and so you keep aside and let me do it. Yeah, so a lot of questions around digital learning. That's true. Low-income private schools. Yeah. So are the questions largely focused on the pedagogy? Is pedagogy the main concern? How you're going to?
We did get some questions on pedagogy as to what should be done and how would the transition to, given that a lot of schools have already been able to transition to technology and non-classroom based learning, what could be ideas for government schools or something like that?
I don't know. One will just have to figure out ways and solutions. But to believe that the online is the answer, it may be for some time a stopgap arrangement. But to imagine it as a full-fledged solution which is going to work wonders, even better than the earlier pedagogy, and replace all that, I think one needs to pause and reflect. And
there's another question on the chat as well. Issue of reverse migration and loss of livelihood. how will this affect demand for education, demand for private versus public?
Demand for private versus public meaning?
I can unmute the participant if they want to.
Yeah. See, demand for education has always been there. In fact, way back in the early 90s.
Hi, Disha. Hina here.
Hina.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Disha.
Hi, Hina.
Hello. Yeah, my question was around how the impact of migrants leaving cities for rural villages or their hometowns, and that combined with loss of livelihoods across the board, how you think that's going to impact demand for education generally. I mean, many families from underprivileged backgrounds are going to be facing immense hardship.
Absolutely.
So I imagine their demand or priorities in terms of education with respect to sustaining themselves will be impacted, and I imagine even there'll be a shift from the low-fee private schools more towards the government school sector. So I just wanted to understand your thoughts around that.
See, we can just kind of try and yeah, these are some of the implications. We may not know exactly what's going to happen, but certainly for sure in this context, when there are other needs which are taking priority, the public sector, that's why, needs to play a greater role in supporting its children.
Thank you, ma'am.
I don't know if you've got the when there's a hierarchy of needs, when the basic needs taking priority over education, actually people will be hesitant to pay for education. No, but I'm not even suggesting that if you pay for education, that's better education, right? One is talking about poor people who can't access education for whatever reason or have not been able to access education. It's a state which has the wherewithal to and the resources uh, to sort of give them education.
Thanks, ma'am. So another question is, we spoke about this earlier, and you did mention this is again a general question about how our, general issue that our ed system faces. Does the pandemic, does the pandemic change? I'm asking this because the pandemic came to us at a point where high stakes testing and all that generally happen, like NEET, board exams, etc. Is it time to think about how we assess children?
See, according to me, there's been a pandemic-like situation in the education sector for a long time. Things are in a mess. I mean, across curriculum, textbooks. You've got pathetic textbooks being published. You've got rote memory being emphasized. You've got examinations which don't really make sense. You've got examinations which kind of eliminates students from the system, which justifies failure. So we've got this kind of situation for a very long time. So it's not that it's led to something. Only I think the only big change which has happened is in terms of accessing, going to a common place, transportation, all of that. But if you look at our curriculum before 2005, and if you look at the pedagogy or any aspect, teacher training, teacher education, we've had several issues from much before, much longer. We've been struggling with issues. And we also have solutions, but the solutions people are not interested in looking at. So we had the Yashpal Committee early 90s where they said that there's a lot of happening, but little is learned or understood, right? And they gave a new meaning to the idea of burden of learning. And they had some wonderful, it's a very small report. I don't know, or if you may not have read it. It's a small report which was a committee which is set up to examine the burden of schooling. It began with the burden of the school bag, the physical load, and then they went on to the mental load, that how the kind of stuff that you're doing in school doesn't give you joy, doesn't make sense to you, this, that, and the other, you can't relate to it, your own how it's dichotomizes your world with the school world. But and it gave some good suggestions. But soon after we had the Chaturvedi committee report. The Chaturvedi committee rubbished the suggestions which were given by Yashpal committee. So that's it. And then we had the NCF 2005, which again dug up the Yashpal was the common factor. and he talked about. So we, the fact that our curriculum or knowledge of what we're trying to do in school, how we're treating our children, how differential education is being given to students, how textbooks are being written, how multiple communities are being represented, the tribes or the caste or gender. So we've always had these problems that we need to rethink or rework on what's happening inside schools, or who goes to a private school, who goes to a public school, or how we interpret people's voices. For instance, when poor people say that beat my child, that somehow make him learn, he doesn't mean it literally. That the idea is that you're desperate actually for learning to happen, and you believe that if that's what will make my child learn, then so be it. So we misinterpret poor people's voices, and we give our own understanding of what we think is right. We have the notion of relevant education, that you do what is relevant. So we had the non-formal education, for instance, in the National Policy on Education 1986, which said that children who can't go to school, or children who work or likely to drop out, they should be, for them we have this non-formal education, which is a brilliant system of having a relevant curriculum at a time which is suitable to them and stuff. So, and clearly the idea of relevant was limiting in that sense, because for a particular group you're talking relevant education. Common school, yeah, why would people want to send their children to common school here? They want to build on social capital. So I send my child to a Doon school or wherever, because I want my child to have friends who will be supporting him or her for life. And so you want the social capital. You want your children to be different, to look different, to talk different. So differently abled, we still, I think, have a long way to go, because we are yet not sensitive. Now, some work has been done in some pockets, but I'm not too sure. So certainly, they're going to be much more affected.
Ma'am, I just have a small question. I mean, it can be slightly different from like the train of thought that you're going in. I'm just referring to the public discourse about like public education and the teachers, right? So they usually say that teachers are inefficient, they're not doing the work, they're just like they're most of the time absentee, and usually all of the burden sort of like falls on the teacher, like you had mentioned earlier as well. I would like to now ask you a question which we usually like don't talk about in the public discourse about public education, right? That what is the resilience and what are the strengths of the public school system? What are the strengths of the teacher population like that is working within public school systems? And like what are the major, what would you say are like highlights of the public school system with respect to
The public schools are everywhere. I mean, difficult terrains in hilly areas or inaccessible terrains, they have to be there. Like they are like the SBI ATM, which you find everywhere. So the fact that you're catering to the needs of all the people, irrespective of whether you're making profit or not, that is the biggest strength. Whether you're making profit or not, whether it's sustainable or not, you need to have a school for children. And see, teachers, the public school teachers, actually teachers across board, I think they're really, because what's expected now is the teachers need to have passion. So if you look at the new policy on education, it talks about teachers having a lot of passion, and taking those people who, how do you measure passion, for instance? How do you say that they are passionate? And that's one secondary point. The primary concern is that if you say that, Disha, if you have passion, you can take care of all the problems irrespective of whatever challenges you're facing. You just go ahead and do it. That's the problem, because you're trying to individualize or personalize a structural problem. You don't deal with structural impediments or issues which are there in the environment, but you kind of pile on to a teacher. So, for instance, this whole thing of corporal punishment, which I've done some work on, the debate keeps the teacher out of the discourse, as if they are the ones who are already accused and guilty. So they are out. So the suggestions, in the NCPC, if you read the suggestions, they are they. So the suggestions like deep breathing, reverse counting. I mean, how the hell does deep breathing or reverse counting help, backward counting help, when there are 100, 200 students in the class, when there are no toilets to go to, when there are no rooms where the water is dripping from everywhere? So if you say that, and there are quite a few programs where you meet some people and they say training की ज़रूरत नहीं है, teachers don't need to train, especially the elementary school teachers. You need to be affectionate and this, that, and the other. And so how the hell will any change happen? First of all, you don't treat a teacher with dignity. Right now, all kinds of monitoring them, installing cameras in the classrooms, biometrics, this, that, and the other. Basic trust is not there.
You mentioned structural inequalities that are not focused on. Like, if you can elaborate a little bit on that, and also how or what kind of policy measures, or like in a larger scale, like what can ideally. Well, again, it's circling back to solutions. You said you don't, but you must have suggestions. So, like, what are the
my basic argument is that India is a hugely diverse country, but it is not an equally diversified kind of thing. It's not that, okay, like, they're just different. But there are clear hierarchies, right? So language or religion or caste or class or gender, whatever, there are clear hierarchies. And we have come up with an education system which is in perfect sync with those hierarchies. So everyone has a place to go to depending on where you come from. But everyone has a certain curriculum to read, which is probably relevant for you, at least in some of the programs. So, if you look at our education system, this perfect sync is there between the unequal society and unequal education system, and we're not even guilty about it. We don't even feel ashamed or guilty. We're quite open about it. That yes, so you come, like, there's different schools, different children. So I'm saying, and even if you look at within the school system, the incidence of differential treatment, or the fact that how pedagogy is like bereft of any meaning making or any agencies awarded neither to the teacher nor the student. So you already have a situation which is not very exciting. So I'm saying this pandemic has largely, I think, to my mind, the questions of access and online pedagogy hence has become important. But if you really reflect on what you're doing in schools, what you're reading in your textbook, those kind of situations have always been there. So, for instance, if you look at textbooks, and one of my students, Deep Jyoti, is here. If you look at textbooks, the way females are represented, or certain tribes are represented, or certain communities are represented, it's deeply problematic. So there was this, sometime like the Maharashtra state government books of sociology were hugely problematic. And there was a WhatsApp joke going around that if you're ugly, then you have to pay dowry. Like, I mean, obviously, if you're ugly.
Yeah.
And then EPW asked me to write something on it, and I looked at the entire book, and it was full of howlers. It was pathetic. I mean, the kind of things they were saying that if you're working, then you need to go out and interact with other men, and then you don't take care of sister, your father-in-law at home, or mother-in-law. I mean, these are so random in a sociology textbook of class 11. So, and I was asked to give suggestions, but I mean, the suggestions are already there. There's a wonderful committee. I'm forgetting the name. I think I have forgotten who was heading the committee on textbooks, and how textbooks you need to look at, and how you need to have an ombudsman and stuff. But that report was, the committee was set up. They gave such a wonderful report, good suggestions, practical suggestions on maintaining, taking care of these kind of problems. But nobody even knows about that report. That's just in the hiding. So it's not that we don't know that we shouldn't be slapping children or harassing children. Or it's not that we don't know that there should be a certain number of students in class. It's not that we don't know that for basic dignity there needs to be a table or a chair or some safe place for them, or there needs to be a boundary wall across the school, or there needs to be a toilet to go to. The very basic things which we all know about, like assessment. Krishna was interested in assessment. So we had the board exams, which is still continuing. It was so many committees and policies have talked about the ill effects of board exams, and then we actually went ahead and talked about it, and there's a you said in class 8 there will be no board exams, children are not going to be detained, and then everybody was gunning for it, the government, teachers, some parents out of course there's this thing, but people were gunning for it and they moved the provision. They said, I mean, and I kept arguing that how can you penalize a child for no fault of his? So child is not learning because of A, B, C, D, E, F. You can't make a child learn because by failing a child. But like Who really cares? Who really cares? So you took 2 steps forward and 4 steps backward, and now everyone's at like feels that the board exams are back to the bang. And if you look at the history of board exams, also this public exams served a certain purpose. They kind of legitimized failure. The systems of elimination. For instance, if you're some of you from Delhi, when you try and for admission in at Delhi College, if you get a 99.1% and the 1995.1% and you don't get admission because somebody else has got a 95.2, you're not never going to crib. You're going to say, okay, that person is probably better than me. So even that kind of failure is justified. Or when you have instances where somebody from a really challenged background does well and newspapers write about it and you celebrate, which you should. But the message which goes across is that if he could get 99% or top of school after studying in the street light, so can you. So what's the big fun? Why do you need a room to study? Why do you need lights to study? Why do you need a toilet in the school? So we've always had issues with our system of education, and I'm not saying that government the government is better. There are issues, but the biggest strength is the kind of wherewithal which is required, the kind of infrastructure, the kind of resources. Only government can do that. Private sector will always work for profit. I mean, we've got several examples where you see in these schools being set up. And there's also work which shows the kind of spaces that they operate from. Now the latest is that they are saying that the low-cost private school lobby is saying that you remove those requirements in the RTE, and we are still doing a fantastic job. But those are problems. There's a question of dignity. There's a question of some basic sense of safety or like dignity with which how we should be treated. So we've been very smart with inequalities of all kinds in our system. We are quite okay with it. Children of special needs, some people have been talking about. Children of special needs, like, well, hardly where do they figure in, or the kind of, so yeah.
I'm just reading out questions from the ones that participants have put up. NTR says, I think there should be focus on teaching how to learn, and textbooks should facilitate self-learning. Are there any curriculum or work in this direction?
Where's the question? Textbook should.
I think there should be more focus on teaching how to learn, and textbooks should also facilitate learning by self.
Yeah, see, actually, if you look at the school education, the curriculum, the pedagogy, and the assessment, they're all linked to each other. So, for instance, you may think that you want to do some brilliant learning, you want to teach children, or you want to help them like be more critical or facilitate all that. If your exam system focuses only on the rote, then you will ensure that children do just that. So you have to think of all of them together. You can't make a change in a curriculum. Or if, for instance, the NCA has some fantastic textbooks, but unfortunately teachers could be trained, and obviously that also takes time. So it will work only when there are far too many loopholes right now in the system, and one can hope to address them one by one. But of course, I mean, everything is linked to the other. So a fantastic textbook, poor teacher, poorly trained teacher.
So another question that I had, because you have worked on teacher education as well, we see that, I mean, this time the Nishta trainings actually cut down, sorry ma'am?
Delhi?
Not just in Delhi, I mean, they have actually cut down the aim was to, I mean, it was a very comprehensive, so I was part of some of the sessions that they held. It was a very, it dealt with almost a very comprehensive list of topics, and it was done for all government teachers. The only thing that was different was there was no training of trainers. So there were 100 trainers, 100 people who were trained nationally, and then they did the trainings in the states themselves. So there were no working with the BRT or CRC or something like that. Do you think that is the issue? Do you think that losses which goes from like trainer to at each level. Is that the issue, or how do we go? How do we see this?
Yeah, one is that. Secondly, like you talk of trainers, everybody's into teacher training. Everybody's into giving gyan to teachers. This is how you should teach. And when you ask what their own credibility is, that's nil. You see, so many organizations have been set up. So I don't really know what to say. People are looking for easy, quick fix solutions that they think they have the knowledge and they can just go and tell people how to do stuff. That's quite problematic.
Even when it comes to government, how do we see this, ma'am? I mean, the Nishta thing was by the government, by the central government. So a lot of issues of implementation are always said, I mean, or attributed to the losses that happen because it happens through trainers of training the trainers, and then it goes through multiple levels where the block resource people, they actually finally go and train the teachers. A lot of implementation errors or implementation issues or implementation inefficiencies are attributed to this multiple levels of training happening. And
yeah, one is that's fairly well known and well sort of acknowledged. The other is the innumerable trainings happening, I believe, of the language, computer training, RTE training, English language training, all kinds of the teachers are constantly being trained to, and they hardly spend time in the class because they're constantly out of the school attending some training or the other. So yeah, and the other thing, the other challenge is the teachers often have this complaint that the kind of issues that we actually deal with, you don't address those issues. You just tell us what to do with. See, the biggest problem is, like, for instance, like I said, there are structural problems. Like, the large number of children in the class, they just have to be reduced. But what do you tell them? It's okay. Take a deep breath and try and sort of engage with them and stuff like that. So if you're thinking that individual solutions, attitudinal changes will make will address structural issues, they will not. If you send a teacher for Vipassana and you think she's going to come back being a really evolved and a reflective and a calm person, it's not going to happen. There are 100 students in a class. Again, she'll get back to, especially from teachers, this kind of an expectation that irrespective of how hugely concerned you are, you can make the change, you can make the difference, you should have the passion. I don't buy that. I mean, passion is important, but passion is important for everybody.
There is also, in the sense, like in the US with Race to the Top and No Child Left Behind, there is also a tendency, or there seems to be a tendency to go towards national benchmarking and national setting of goals. Do you think that is, I mean, how do you see this? And are states, are they diverse enough to counter this argument? In the sense, do states have similar issues, or do you think national goal setting makes sense?
Some goals, perhaps, in terms of what children need to know when they go to school, or what are the basic requirements that need to be met. But yeah. But these days, again, you have so much of emphasis on assessment. That constantly children are being assessed by some agency or the other. So, in fact, to talk about ASAR, for instance, there is huge, divided researchers into two strong camps. So if you look at their methodology, they go to children's homes and they are not teachers, they conduct an oral test and they train those community volunteers and they go to people's homes and ask children questions. That has been like really critiqued by people like Krishna Kumar, and who say that doesn't make sense and you can't be going to barging into a child's home and totally unfamiliar context, strangers come in asking you questions and then you interpret the results. So even methodologically, you could be all over the place. And and sometimes you frankly, I think that forget about the testing and all that. Initially, a couple of years back, there was not so much a focus on tests, but children were learning. Now this constant talk around assessments and multiple assessments, multiple agencies are showing the children are not learning. That's another become a big convoluted kind of a thinking. Then you were talking about assessment also, Krishna, in the beginning. See, assessment again, like I said, we've had a pathetic system of assessment, especially with the board exams. That's a known fact. Every single committee, every single policy has talked about the stress it creates, causes, the one-sided, the skewed nature of the assessment and stuff like that. I need to change about it. But the system works because it eliminates with the huge numbers of the job seekers or wanting to get admission in higher education institutions. So these marks and the board exams, especially the uniformity, objectivity, partiality, they work really well. You can't jo jeeta wo sikandar. You can't question or debate. You got less marks, you got less marks. Too bad. So it's a system which works very well because it eliminates students and they are okay with their failure. They don't realize that it's because there are not enough seats. In DU, if you get 99 also, 98, you don't get admission in a college of your choice. Still you come to terms with the fact, okay, yeah, that guy's better than me. Such a warped kind of a system with a more people wanting to join colleges or wanting to do jobs. The system works very well. Now again, this I think somebody had written this rush to do. So again, when the CBSE came out with the CCE kind of a thing, CCE in principle is fantastic. I mean, nobody can doubt the, the principal position it's taking on assessment and learning. But the way it was done and the kind of things that they were trying to measure was bizarre. I mean, some of the examples I was reading said that, and that was copied by a lot of other states then because it was a CBSE manual. It said that if you have to mark a child on being courteous, then if the child greets you once, you can't be too sure the child is courteous. But if a child greets you 5 times, then you can be. I mean, it's bizarre. It's a CBSE manual for assessing children on co-curricular activities. And this is what you're writing. So what students started doing, they started attracting teachers. Hey, good morning, good morning. It said people who participate in national freedom struggle or you raise your voice against gender violence, then the teacher is supposed to mark. How do you mark? You say something, I respond to that, right? If you say that I have to mark Vishwan whether he raises his voice against gender violence. So there has to be something happening around you for you to react. Right? Context has to be either you create a context or you're omnipresent all the time. So every time we come up with these solutions in a rush, in a hurry, and then go on to people, then you blame the teachers who are especially older teachers that, like these younger ones are more pliable and more amenable to this. The old teachers are they're really problematic. They're not. They have years of experience. Trust that as well. So again, there was this teacher, I think Madhya Pradesh, talking about CCE and activity-based learning. She said, it's really good, it works well. Children are learning. I said, really? But the other teacher was telling me that it caused a lot of problems. And the moment she realized that, I'm on her camp or site, she said, Madam, hamara itna bura haal hai. They've tied her hands at the back and they're telling that you set the table in order. If you look at teachers, you don't give them, very little trust.
Again, just following up on that, you have talked about how board exams have caused a lot of problems. And what do you think about the alternative that has been suggested in the NEP this time? Like having subject-wise.
If you read the position paper on reform, examination reform, there are lots of good suggestions. Flexibility in terms of flexibility, timing, this, that, and the other. I think they just need to be implemented. Somebody needs to just go ahead and implement. And CBSE actually did that. They made the 10th boards optional for some time. How will context to context? Class, caste. Who's bothered, frankly? I mean, in the sense, if they were really bothered, then they would have not. You see the textbooks; they're openly. Now also with the virus, what's happening is they're blaming one particular community and piling onto them, saying that it's caused by them in India at least. It's crazy, and we do that in schools also. When we read about tribals, that they live in jungles and they eat basic bare minimum clothes and bamboo dance and all of that. You project a certain community in a certain manner, and that certainly leads to stereotyping outside of the school as well. So discrimination, prejudice, it stems from our textbooks. It lives in our breathes in our classrooms.
I think there's some. We'll take this last question. National policies are forced on different states from top to bottom. What will be the way in giving free hands to each state to design and come up with their education model in their respective states?
So national policies are not meant to be prescriptive, like word by word. There is a basic framework which it kind of lays down in terms of what children should be taught or what should be the aims of education, and then the states should be doing their own work. And but unfortunately, states also don't have the wherewithal or the expertise or the resources to even invite people or to have a dialogue or a discussion around how to think. So they often copy what's being done. That's what happened with the NCF also. Quite a few states simply have copied the NCF and sort of made it a little more context specific.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is, yeah, one national policy it's like a broad framework. So constitutional values need to be emphasized, or but not it's not it doesn't tell you what you should be doing in the classroom or in the schools or what you should be teaching.
If you don't have any other questions, we can.
There's also a question I don't think I've responded to.
There was a question about public examples of public education systems around the world from where we can learn from.
Look at Finland. If you look at Finland, people praise Finland. Irrespective of how a student does, teachers are never running back. There's basic trust in the teacher. That's unquestionable. It's like it's unwavering. And if the child does badly, that doesn't impact because it's assumed the teacher would have done her best. And that's why that child did not perform. Here we are piling on to teachers, we're piling on to whoever possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then the exam results also linked to something, right? They're linked to finances, they're linked to aid, they're linked to whatever position, wherever. So that's how teachers have little choice. Then they try and just teach the minimum. I mean, I don't really know. Education is a very broad school education systems, and what's happening inside schools and different kinds of schools is what, according to you, is one positive effect of the pandemic on the public education system. Positive effect of the pandemic on what will be or is already. I can't think of. I think the need to reiterate that public schools should stay, and they should they should cater to the needs of all the people with dignity. I think that's most important, because certainly it's going to make lives of lots of people much tougher, and joblessness and poverty and all of that. Yeah. But it's also strange. On one hand, it's taught us that the lives are so fragile. On the other hand, we still believe that we can protect ourselves. So we are piling on to anybody who has the disease. and yet that smugness, that like it's really crazy. It led to a lot of contradictions.
Ma'am, I just have like one last question. I know that again might be talking about like a solution or something, but I can't help but like sort of think about as to how to increase the, like, I don't know what kind of measures as policy we need to implement to increase the agency of the teachers in the system, because they usually just like put in several roles, right? Even for example, like they'll be the ones who'll be dealing with the mental health effects of the children as well.
Yeah,
last week we were talking about caregiving, like as a caregiver role, as well as like a teacher role, as well as another bridge between the community and the government, all of these things, right? And even right now they're being deployed to do several other like tests and all of that in the community. So like how what kind of measures need to be taken to like increase the agency of the teachers as well as of the students like within the system? So like,
see, in our country, we tell people that feel good about yourself, you're doing a fantastic job. Those things are not going to help. Like, for instance, the boards have got stuck in between, and I'm getting mailed almost at least 2-3 times a week from the ICSE, through the school, saying that, you know, PPTs, deep breathing, this, that, relax. How the hell is that going to help? So you say that we cancel the board exams for class 10 students because it doesn't make sense. And in Bombay, you have a system where you don't necessarily take your children to the school. They have a cutoff and they, like, you know, massively pile onto you. And so similarly, when you talk of teachers, you look at countries which are treating teachers with basic dignity. They have good education. They are the best people for teaching. They pay them really well, and and that regard is there in the, because you also have created systems of systemic procedures where the policies where the teachers hugely regarded. Here we don't. We in everything that we're doing, monitoring the teacher, micromanaging the teacher, tell her what to do. At 9:15 she do that, 9:20 she do that. Then you have these CCTV cameras. So there's still so much of distrust. And let's talk around ridiculing teachers. You know, how is it going to help? And constantly in need of something, I'll tell you, you listen to me. You're older, you're more like stubborn. So let me. So there's so much of distrust. There's hardly any respect, and respect not by words. You can't say that you do a fantastic job, a para teacher, but you're paying $500 to her or $1,000 to her. You shouldn't worry about these things. You should do it because of the goodness of heart. So all this will not work. You have to take strong policy measures to support teachers, to show that the system respects them, that you show them that they're required. And you have, yeah, why not? You have vigorous requirements also. You take the people who are good and, you know, so there will not be a last option for people to get into teaching. Teacher को कुछ नहीं मिला, let's get into teaching. Don't employ them on contractual basis of very little salary and constantly crib over the fact that they're getting paid a lot and they don't really. See, and what I'm saying is, this being verbose will not help. Like I said about the corporal punishment, telling your teachers are not part of the debate at all. And you're telling the teachers, deep breathe, meditate, as if it's an attitudinal problem. A teacher gets excited in the class. I'm not saying always, yes, but she loses her temper, she loses her cool, she gets worked up because there are huge numbers of students. Address that. Address that. Just say that, look, this is not going to work. At least, and we as researchers, we need to constantly say things, not necessarily that people are listening to us, but at least you need to say things which you believe are, like, you know, fundamentally right. Like to say, yeah, it's like the passion hoga, love for children rather than nonsensical thing. It's quite. I'm not saying it's an ideal situation. It's quite possible that I may not necessarily love children, but I love teaching and I'm very good with my job. And it's possible. It doesn't mean that only if you love children and you're physically affectionate towards them. So these are. So all these policies which you see now, they are both anti-teachers and anti-students. Students are being streamed into different categories, ability-wise, irrespective of the fact that they get teased and they don't feel good about it. Their dignity is impacted. Then teachers, so I've spoken to so many teachers who say, "Ma'am, we're in a really pathetic situation. There are also teachers who are teased, molested, teased by young boys in the school, for instance, if she's teaching that. Would you say that she's like, how do you push them in as villains of the piece? The teachers need to be told they have not been trained, they don't know enough. So both, if you have to create a truly, genuinely democratic space, both teachers and students need to uh, have a say in that space. You can't, like, you know, paint one as the dark this thing and as a villain. So installing cameras will not help. Biometric attendance, I don't know, taking selfies with a date, and even training to an extent where teachers have absolutely no autonomy of what to. And Krishna Kumar has talked about no autonomy in terms of what to teach, how to assess. Everything, everything is taken out of our hands and given to the others, the outside agencies. And how will you kind of how will that help? And that's why the entire origin of the board exams, where an impersonal, anonymous exam takes precedence over a face-to-face, because they don't trust the teacher. She'll be partial. So we're doing things which will distrust the teacher, which gives her no agency, and that's not only happening in India; it's happening in other countries also. And you're constantly made to show your work, project your work, show your work, maintain records. So then the record keeping becomes more important, which you may have seen in cases. or the fact that you have to finish a certain portion within a certain time. So then those are requirements which are working under constraints. Then what kind of agency are we talking about? So according to me, the pandemic, I mean, I don't think it's going to change the, people are saying it's going to change the way we think about education or bring about certain changes, yes, maybe short term, maybe long term, I don't know. But our education system has been struggling for a number of years for various reasons. And that I think, yeah. So in this context, at least the government schools are free. So like Hina had asked the question, that what's going to happen in terms of demand for private education? Yeah, it probably will go down if the other needs take priority, people who are willing to pay for education. But then we need to take care of those people who are coming to our schools, and of course, you sort of tighten up those schools as well. So this basic assumption that private is better is one needs to really think about and reflect on. It all depends on where you are located. Wherever you go, that social location will determine the goodness or the badness of the school that you go to. It's not so much the private and the public.
Right.
Are we done with questions?
Yeah.
Ma'am, today you sort of like talked about several things, and like today, thank you for joining us, ma'am, and it was super enlightening for us, and like we sort of like learned a lot more. And like you said, I mean, one of the most hard-hitting things for me was that internally they're all like such heterogeneous spaces, and like there are hierarchies within each of the sector, right? So the whole like notion that okay, private versus public school sort of under that kind of a binary sort of like broke for me today. I mean, even though I sort of knew it on some level, it sort of brought about a nuanced view as to like how they're similar and how they're different as well. And I also think that one other takeaway for me is to sort of like understand the role of NGOs and as well as like private schools that are trying to like I don't know, fill out a need. Like you said, they should be supportive instead of like trying to replace the public schools. So like that is also something that I'm taking away today. And also I sort of got to think a little bit more about the evaluation methods and like how at the core of it aims to like eliminate students, and we need to like sort of think.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you, ma'am.
joining us. It was an honor to have you here with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be sharing the video soon as well for those who could not join us today. In case of someone, you can share the link. Thank you all participants for joining us today as well, and some great questions were raised. Thank you so much. Thank you, Geshna, for conceptualizing it with me, and you all have a great day today. And
yes, thank you all. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.